and I changed several times. So let's start it, at the beginning. 2 Peter chapter 1. And I don't know if this is the best place to start a lesson on kindness, but this is where I'm going to start this one. You can decide later if there's a better place to start such a lesson. Peter and Paul did this a lot, and I can't fault them for it, obviously, because it was the Spirit of God guiding them to write this way and to speak this way. But they had a lot of sentences that would just kind of run on, and so it drives preachers crazy because you're trying to pick a particular point, but everything's tied into the thing before that, the thing before that, the thing before that, so you want to go way, way, way back and grab all the context and bring it in, which is why I start a lot of sermons in Genesis chapter 1. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, but I do that a lot. And there's good reason for that. I think every preacher should start their sermons in Genesis chapter 1. But at any rate, we're in 2 Peter chapter 1, and we're going to start at verse 5, which is the place where Peter writes this. For this very reason also apply all diligence in your faith. Supply moral excellence, and in your moral excellence, knowledge. And in your knowledge, self-control. And in your self-control, perseverance. And in your perseverance, godliness. And in your godliness, there it is, brotherly kindness. This is one of the things we're supposed to be deliberately adding to our own personages. After brotherly kindness, love. And then he says, if these qualities are yours and are increasing, they render you neither useless nor unfruitful in the true knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. On the other hand, he who lacks these qualities is blind or short-sighted, having forgotten his purification from his former sins. Therefore, brethren, be all the more diligent to make certain about his calling and choosing you. For as long as you practice these things, you will never stumble. For in this way, you see what I'm talking about? He keeps going. I'm looking for a period. There aren't any periods. And there's good reason, because all this stuff is tied in together. He says, in this way, the entrance into the eternal kingdom of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ will be abundantly supplied to you. Now, there's a way in which you can think of that last thing he said. In this way, adding all these things to your person will make your entrance into the kingdom sure. And it sounds almost like salvation by works, but it's not. Why do we add these things, or why are we compelled to add these things? Is it by the concept of works and earning things, or is it the concept that we put our faith in Jesus Christ, and these are the things we see in him? These are the things we see his apostle telling us to emulate in our lives and to add to our lives. So we're doing that by faith. It's our faith, is it not, that compels us to add these things to our lives. It's not a matter of works, but faith, kindness. Kindness is a matter of faith, because there are things that you have to believe for them to compel you to be kind. And let's just talk about kindness. I want to go back to the scriptures a little bit. We're going to go all the way back to Joshua in just a moment. So if you want to be flipping to Joshua, but let's talk about a few things related to kindness, just in our own cultural setting, if you will. You know any fairy tales? What do you know about the fairy tale Snow White? Tell me about Snow White. She was kind. Now, whatever else she might have been, she was kind. And it seems like in the fairy tale that's a big deal for her to be kind, because she's contrasted with her wicked stepmother. It's always those stepmothers. Boy, you got to watch out for stepmothers, I'm telling you. Cinderella, what do you know about Cinderella? She was kind. Yes, she was beautiful, and she was a princess and all that, or married a prince, and she lost her glass slipper, so you can fault her for her shoes falling off or whatever if you want, but she was kind. Would we care about Snow White, would we care about Cinderella if they weren't kind? Probably we wouldn't, but they were kind. Kindness is something that is so endearing that the authors of these well-known and long-time popular stories knew that, so they added it to their characters. Sleeping Beauty, same thing. Beauty and the Beast. Now there's a story right there. How did the prince get in trouble in the first place? How did he turn into a beast? He refused to be kind. Have you not seen the movie? He refused to be kind, and he's going to remain a beast until he learns to care about others and have kindness in his heart and love in his heart and compassion, because all these things go together. We can talk about the value of kindness, but you can't talk about kindness without the consideration of compassion, of love, of respect for others, of regarding it. All these things go together, and you can't separate them out no matter how much you want to. There are individual aspects, but they're all part of the same thing, which in reality is godliness. And we're so familiar with these things that even in our culture we have these stories that express these things as values. And kindness is a definite reality in our world, but it's a reality that's based on a concept. And what I mean is, you can't hand somebody some money and say, here, go to the store and buy some kindness for me. You ever thought about it like that? You can't get online and find it and order it and have it sent to your house. It doesn't work that way. And at the same time, even while you can't buy it, you can't order it, there's really nothing more valuable to our existence than kindness. What would your day-to-day existence be like if it weren't for the kindness of others? If one day, everyone you meet was either unkind or even worse, indifferent, what do you think you'd be like at the end of that day? I think we start to see the value of kindness. If we didn't have an idea before, I think we'll start to see it now. It's a concept, but it's such a reality. It's a concept that has to be lived out. And guess who are the ones who should be at the top of the totem pole living it out? That's us. I thought about that word kind, and I thought, well, in the English language, we use that word two different ways. As a matter of fact, if you go back to Genesis 1, you with me? Genesis 1, it is said 10 different times that living things reproduce how? After they're kind. Now, does that have anything to do with them being nice to each other? And we might think, well, no, that's not the kind that it's talking about. But I thought, wait a minute, let's go back and look at the etymology of this word. It does. Because the concept of kindness, the English word kind, comes from the way family members are supposed to treat each other. Okay, you can go ahead and laugh. Because we've seen how we treat each other sometimes as family members. And it's often, if you have company come to your house, who gets the best treatment, the company or the people that live in the house with you? Oh, here's your dessert, and here's your dessert, and here's your dessert, and you go play out in the backyard. So it's kind of the way it happens sometimes because we get so familiar, we stop expressing kindness sometimes in our own homes, in our own families, in our own marriages. But the word kind comes from the concept of someone else who is the same kind. If you are the same kind, it's the inference built into it that you're going to treat one another with kindness. And so while they seem to be two very separate ideas, they're not very separate at all. They come together. People who are of the same kind, things who are of the same kind, express kindness. That's the idea. Whether or not we do it, it's up to us. But that's the idea nonetheless. And then we have these sayings in our culture that you've probably heard or seen on posters. Speak kindly to everyone because you never know what battles that person might be fighting. That's a great saying, isn't it? A great poster. You never know what's going on in people's lives, so be kind to everybody. And we don't even have to ask, why is that a factor? Because we understand the value of kindness. Kindness encourages people. Kindness supports people. Kindness is something that projects dignity, if you will. In other words, somebody might not feel like they have much dignity or much self-worth, but when you show them kindness, that act of kindness expressed towards them personally has the impact of giving them a better sense of themselves. The kindness you have done them makes them feel better about themselves. That's just the natural way that it works. That's kindness. This is my favorite of all the posters or sayings. Kindness is a language that the blind can see and the deaf can hear. You know, I like that one. How about you? It's a language. What do you do with a language? Well, you communicate to people. You talk to people. And kindness speaks. Kindness speaks volumes. They say, picture paints 1,000 words. How many words does an act of kindness speak? Now, these are just things in our culture, things we can observe about life. But let's go to some passages of Scripture and take a look at how kindness is seen in the Bible. I mentioned Joshua. I'm going to go to Joshua chapter 2. We were just here a couple of weeks ago talking about the 5 women who are mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus by Matthew. One of those women is Rahab. Rahab was a Gentile. She was a harlot. She lived in the city of Jericho. And when Israel had come out of Egypt and was about to go into the promised land, Jericho was the first city that they were going to demolish or take captive. And so they sent 2 spies. Joshua sent 2 spies into Jericho. Those 2 spies hid out in Rahab's house because Rahab was a harlot. And it doesn't say, but I suppose they went there because nobody would think anything about a couple of strangers coming into town and going up to see the harlot. Yeah. Things haven't changed much, have they? At any rate, she knows who they are. And so she hides them when the king of Jericho comes looking for them. He wants to find those spies and get them out of town or get them out of this world. So she hides them. And this is what she says to them in verse 12. She says, "Now therefore please swear to me by the Lord, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you will also deal kindly with my father's household, and give me a pledge of truth, and spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death." That's what she was asking. Why did she ask that, though? What's the whole point? What's her compulsion? Or what do we call it in drama? What's my motivation? Well, if you back up in the text, look at verse 9. She said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath." And then that brings us down to the point we read just a little bit ago. My point in bringing these facts out is that she was being kind to them based on her faith. She had a faith in God. She wasn't Jewish, but then she knew about God. And she knew what God had done. And based on her knowledge of God and her faith in what God had done and what God would do, she was compelled to be kind to these men in hopes that they would return that kindness. And it worked. This wasn't a ruse. This wasn't some underhanded scheme. She learned about God, and based on God, she put her faith in what He was doing, and kindness was a result. And her kindness to those men resulted in God being kind to her. Everybody in Jericho died except Rahab and her family. Her kindness saved her whole family. And then, of course, there's that little bit of history that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where Rahab winds up being in the lineage of Christ. Isn't that something? It's big stuff to me. And then 2 Chronicles chapter 10. 2 Chronicles chapter 10. This is where Solomon has died and his son Rehoboam is taking the throne. And Rehoboam wanted to get some counsel on how he should behave as a king. So he goes, it says in verse 6, to the elders who had served with his father Solomon while he was still alive, saying, how do you counsel me to answer this people? This is 2 Chronicles chapter 10, and now we're in verse 7. They spoke to him, saying, if you will be kind to this people and please them and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever. But he forsook the counsel of the elders which they had given him, and consulted with the young men who grew up with him and served him. So he said to them, what counsel do you give me, that we may answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, lighten the yoke which your fathers put on us? And of course these young men said, you need to show them who's boss. Tell them, if you thought my dad was bad, I'm going to be even worse. And so Rehoboam, as a result of listening to this counsel, not the counsel of kindness that the older men had given him, but the counsel of selfishness, Israel became a divided nation. And of course, we don't know what would have happened. But I tend to think like these older guys thought. If he would have gone to the people and said, I will no longer tax you. I'm not going to put this heavy burden that my father put on you. I'm going to lighten your load. I'm going to extend kindness towards you. How do you think those people would have responded? What's the natural thing to do when somebody is kind to you? Well, you want to be kind back. You want to be kind back. A couple of weeks ago, we had a dry spell for a couple of hours. So I went down in the backyard and got my lawnmower out. Started mowing the grass while I had a chance. Lo and behold, my neighbor next door saw me out there with my push mower going to town. He came out and got on his John Deere yard tractor and come over there, zip, zam, zop. It was done. Debbie and I took him and his wife out to eat. Why did I do that? Because I'm a great guy. When somebody shows you a kindness, if you've got any sense at all, even if you're not nice, if you've got sense, you will return gratitude for that kindness. And I'll tell you what, if you don't do that, you're not going to have any joy in your life. You're going to be miserable if you don't return gratitude for kindness. Yesterday, we had to be gone all day. I was planning to mow the grass, but something came up. We had to be gone all day. I come back. He mowed the grass again. I'm going to have to take him out again. But I'm thinking about this. If Debbie and I take him and his wife out, we're already getting to eat, so that expense is a given. I'm getting my yard mowed for like $25. Now, you know, I'm making a joke about that because what you see happening here in this little story is people building a relationship. And that's what kindness does. Kindness builds bridges. So many times we hear this idea about people who are burning bridges. Well, why do they burn bridges? Well, they're not being kind to other people. They're not being nice to other people. They're not having regard for other people. And so they burn bridges, and nobody wants to have anything to do with them. They don't want to cross that bridge to that person again because you get hurt. But when people are kind, you gravitate towards them. When people do you good, you know you can trust them. There's a relationship building quality in kindness that isn't in everything else, but it's in kindness. And when Rahab was kind to those spies, it resulted in the salvation of her house because Joshua, the commander of Israel, the one under God's charge, said, we're going to be kind to them. When Rehoboam was given the charge by the elders, you be kind to those people and you'll unite this country, he disregarded that advice, and the country became divided. Kindness is a powerful thing. If you look at Proverbs 31, and this to me, it's like I could quit the sermon here, and I would have. I was planning to, but Bobby said I was going to preach a long sermon, so I got to keep going. Yeah. Proverbs 31. Most everybody knows what Proverbs 31 is about before we even get there. Oh yeah, that's That's the woman whose price is far above rubies. That's the worthy woman. When you look at all the marvelous things that the worthy woman is and the worthy woman does, look down at verse 26. She opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. The teaching of kindness is on her tongue. Kindness builds people up. If you want your home to be happy, build up the people who are in that family. Speak kindly to them. Speak encouragingly to them. Find things about them that are positive and mention those positive aspects of their life. Everybody else in the world will see the negative. And it's easy to see the negative because we've all got the negative, and we tend to gravitate towards the negative because we think, well, they're already doing, if they're doing that and that's good, that's good. They're already doing that. I don't need to say anything to them about that. But they've got this negative situation over here. I need to fix that. And the only way to fix that is to nag them, tell them and tell them and tell them and tell them again. You got this problem over here. And we all know how well that works. That doesn't fix anything. As a matter of fact, it makes us, why do I even try? But when you're kind towards people with your words and you build people up, you encourage them. And you know what the definition of encourage is? It's putting courage in. Kindness does that. It makes people feel better about themselves, more capable about themselves, more worthy and they become so much more likely to do the things that they really ought to be doing in the first place because of someone else's kindness. That's what the worthy woman does. She builds with her words. The teaching of kindness is on her tongue. Some translations have the law of kindness. If you see that, teaching of kindness, the law of kindness, that's what that's all about. And then Jonah. This is an interesting text here about Jonah. You know the story of Jonah? God wanted Jonah to go to Nineveh and preach to it so that the Ninevites would be saved. What did Jonah want? He wanted the Ninevites to burn. I wanted to burn with a purple passion. If he knew about nukes, he would have said, nuke them till they glow. God was showing mercy, or if you will, kindness towards the Ninevites. That's what kindness is. It's mercy. Kindness is grace. We talk about love and kindness and mercy and compassion. That's what kindness is. It's all of those things. When Jonah saw that God was being good to the Ninevites, this is what he says. Chapter 4, verse 2. He prayed to the Lord and he said, "Please, Lord, was not this what I said while I was still in my own country? Therefore, in order to forestall this, I've fled to Tarshish. For I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, and one who relents concerning calamity." Did Jonah know about God? What in that description is inaccurate? Well, there's nothing in that description that's inaccurate. But somehow Jonah didn't make the connection. Oh, if you're that way, I should be that way. If you're abundant in loving kindness, I should be abundant in loving kindness. But instead of seeing that idea and saying, I need to embody kindness because God embodies kindness, he says, I hate the Ninevites. His hatred for them was stronger than his admiration for God. And so he followed the path of the flesh, if you will. He followed the path of his passions and his hatred for the Ninevites. And he never did quite get it. And I think it's just so interesting when you finish out Jonah, God doesn't conclude for us what finally happened with Jonah, if Jonah ever got the picture or not. We just know that this is how Jonah felt. He hated the Ninevites so much, and he didn't want God to be compassionate on them because he knew that that's what God does all the time. Is that what he's doing for you? That's what he's doing for me. I should have died a long time ago. I deserve to. The wages of sin is death. Not to get to live until you're 58, 59 years old or past that. Not to get to have a full belly every day and a warm bed to sleep in every night. Not to have a roof over my head, Loved ones, that's not the wages of sin. That's the wages of kindness. That's what God pays us all the time. And He does that on the basis of our faith. And even sometimes when we're not all that faithful. Just a couple of things about Jesus with regard to kindness. Because I would have thought, and perhaps you would have thought, if you get out your concordance and you look up the word kind or kindness, how many times is that going to appear in the Gospels? Oh, that's got to be a bunch in the Gospels. You don't see those words there. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. But do you see any kindness in the Gospels? It's on nearly every page. And since it's on nearly every page, and you can see that for yourself, I just want to take you to a couple of examples so you can see what I'm talking about. In Mark chapter 1, this is Mark's Gospel, the first chapter, says they went to Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and he began to teach. They were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Just then, there was a man in their synagogue with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." And Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." And throwing him into convulsions, the unclean spirit cried out with a loud voice and came out of him. And they were all amazed, so that they debated among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And immediately the news about him spread everywhere into all the surrounding district of Galilee. Now, you don't see the word kindness or kind. But if you were that guy who had the unclean spirit in him, what would you think, how would you consider what Jesus had done for you? Don't you think that guy considered that an act of kindness? I think pretty much so. Verse 29. Immediately after they came out of the synagogue, they came into the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John, and Simon's mother-in-law was lying sick with a fever, and immediately they spoke to Jesus about her. And he came to her and raised her up, taking her by the hand, and the fever left her, and she waited on them. Once again, it doesn't say anything about kindness or being kind or how Jesus felt or thought. But if you were Simon Peter's mother-in-law, and you were sick, and Jesus comes in and heals you, how would you feel about what Jesus had done? Don't you think you would consider that an act of kindness? You get a little farther on down here and you see people start bringing, they're sick, they're demon-possessed, everybody that's got a problem, get that guy to Jesus. And so Jesus is healing people, as we say, left and right. And then we get down to verse 40. A leper came to Jesus, beseeching him and falling on his knees before him and saying, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Now remember what the law said about lepers. If you haven't studied that to be able to recall it, go back and study that after the sermon. After the sermon. Because what the law said about lepers was they had to remain separate from other people. They had to cover their mouths with their hand and say, "Unclean, unclean," so that people who didn't have leprosy wouldn't get too close to them. So here's a guy who's ostracized from society. He comes to Jesus and beseeches him, falls on his knees, and he says, "If you're willing, you can make me clean." Look at verse 41. Moved with compassion. What does that word moved mean? Well, we know what it means. That's what we did a little while ago. That chair was in one place and I moved it. I know it's kind of funny to think of how that all worked out, isn't it? And that plant was turned over and, well, I moved it. And this plant was out of place, so we moved it. We know what it means to move something. Have you ever thought about the idea of God coming down in the flesh, understanding the weakness of our fleshly nature, seeing the condition of somebody who's hurting, and the God of the universe is moved by that? Tell me that's not a great thing. He looks down in our lives and he sees the situations we're in, and he is moved by what we're going through, our pain, our suffering, our difficulties, our confusion, our lack of faith, everything that we have that troubles us and that we think God would be embarrassed and ashamed about. He looks down and he's got compassion for us. That's why he sent his son. And Jesus comes in the flesh and he sees this guy who's ostracized. He's got leprosy. And he's on his knees beseeching Jesus, and Jesus is moved. He's moved with compassion. And so what does he do? He stretched out his hand and touched him. Now you and I, not knowing too many lepers, we might not get the impact of that. But you weren't supposed to touch a leper. Why don't you touch a leper? Because it's highly contagious. It's highly contagious and it's incurable. But Jesus reaches out and he touches this man. Probably the first non-leprous touch this guy has had in who knows how long. But Jesus touches him. He could have just said the word. He could have blinked an eye and the guy would have been healed. But instead, he deliberately, I think, does this act of kindness, and he reaches out to physically touch this man. And there's something about physical touch that we cannot deny. That's why we hug, isn't it, Bobby? And bless your hearts, if you don't like hugs, I understand that not everybody is just going to be a hugger. And I wish we could have a place for you to go to so you wouldn't be uncomfortable. I'm serious. I'm not making a joke. I'm really serious. If you don't like to hug, I don't want to force anybody to do anything. Just like I love steak, but I don't want to force a vegetarian to eat steak. Get your vegetables. Enjoy your vegetables. Pardon me while I eat this cow. I respect vegetarians. I wish I had that kind of control. But I like a hug. I can feel my blood pressure going. Can't you? You get a good hug, you get that squeeze, and it's just good stuff. I'm sorry, I'm going on here, but it's all wrapped up in this kindness stuff. And then Jesus said this. I'll close with this. There's other really good stuff on kindness in here, but I'll close with this in Mark chapter 9. Jesus is sending his disciples out on what we now call the limited commission, sending them out to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. This is not the great commission to go into all the world with the gospel, but he's sending them out to the people of Israel to tell them about the kingdom of God. And in the process of that, John sees one casting out demons in his name, and we tried to prevent him because he was not following us. And this is verse 39, Mark 9:39. But Jesus said, "Do not hinder him, for there is no one who will perform a miracle in my name and be able to soon afterwards speak evil of me. For he who is not against us is for us. For whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because of your name as followers of Christ, truly I say to you, he will not lose his reward." Now, we don't see the word kindness there, but you read that act, giving somebody a cup of water. What is that but kindness? And that may be perhaps the simplest picture of kindness, but what Jesus is saying is, when you treat the people of God with kindness, it's going to come back to you tenfold. You're going to get your reward. So, that being said, let us do where we started, what Peter instructed us to do through the inspiration of the Spirit. Let's be diligent to add to our lives kindness. Kindness. Do it. Live it. Treat people with dignity and respect. Speak to them with a smile. Treat them like human beings. It doesn't matter if they're your waiter at I said waiter, didn't I? If they're your server at a restaurant, or the garbage man on the street, or the janitor in the school. We have these ideas of people who have certain jobs, and they're not up to the standard of dignity that some of the rest of us are. Well, who said that? Who made that rule? That's a fleshly, worldly rule. No matter who people are, they are there, if you think about it, as opportunities for us to be kind. We're going to stand and sing a song of encouragement and invitation, and this cross behind me represents the greatest kindness that ever took place, is God giving His Son so that we might be saved through His sacrifice. We're going to stand and sing a song for the benefit of anybody who'd like to be baptized into Christ or have the prayers of this congregation, we just ask you to come forward and let us know how we can help while we're singing this song.